Quick show of hands, how many in this room are carrying some level of anxiety into this Christmas season this year? Okay, it's quite a few of us. I'm definitely in that camp. It is just the final few days of my finals week right now, and so I am feeling it. And in addition to that, Jules and I were about to go home for Christmas, back to Texas, visit with family for a little while. But that presents another problem, because with her family of 10 and my family of 8, that's a lot of presents that we must purchase. And I have done, you want to know how much Christmas present shopping I've been doing? Zero. Zilch. Haven't done any. Any other procrastinators in the room? Anyone? Okay, I feel a little bit better now. All right. It's very easy to be anxious whenever not everything in our lives are taken care of. It's very easy to be anxious whenever there are certain things that are not aligned in the ways that we would like them to be. Anxiety, it isn't some sort of rare fringe condition or struggle. Recent CDC data suggests that about 1 in 8 adults regularly feel worry, nervousness, or anxiety. And about 1 in 5 adults have been told at some point in their life that they have what's within the range of things considered anxiety disorders. Even more sobering, national health data shows that in 2022, nearly 1 in 5 adults had anxiety symptoms in just the prior 2 weeks, and that number has risen since 2019. And so just so you know, if you're walking in today feeling a little bit anxious, you're not crazy. You're not alone. You are not the only odd one out in this room. And the holidays, what we see often, can actually amplify some of that pressure. A recent national poll found that 41% of adults said that they expect more holiday stress this year than last year. And so it seems like these sorts of patterns are just heightening over time. And so what do we do with all this anxiety that we have already self-admittedly recognized we struggle with? Well, whenever we're anxious, all we want to do is see it end, right? We just want an end to our anxiety. In the same way, whenever I go out into this cold winter weather, y'all Pennsylvanians are crazy with this, all I'm thinking about is whenever I can go inside somewhere that's safe and warm, right? If I have to endure the elements too long, that's going to be painful. In the same way, whenever we have to endure the elements of our anxiety, that's going to be painful. The problem is, even though all we can think about is wanting to get out of our place where we're so anxious, we don't know when that's going to actually take place. We don't know when God is going to allow it that we can get out of our current circumstance and get into a better one where we find that kind of refuge. However, Ruth chapter 2 tells a story about that exact kind of thing beginning to happen, where God takes a person's anxiety and turns it into peace. And so if you would turn over to Ruth chapter 2 with me, we're just going to continue walking through the story we started to walk through last week. Last week, just to recap, where we left off last in the book of Ruth, we saw a family that was broken by famine, by bad decisions, and by deep personal loss. Naomi and Ruth are both widows with nothing and no one but each other. And we ended last chapter in Ruth chapter 1 with Naomi bitter, convinced that her story is basically over. Pretty pessimistic, chapter 1. This chapter, it begins with the introduction of a key character that will soon become very important to redeeming this so far very depressing story. And so turn with me over to verse 1 here. It says, "Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So during the time of famine, whenever Elimelech, Naomi, and their whole family had left the promised land, unfaithfully, as we talked about last week, whenever they went into the land of Moab, Boaz is one of those who stayed behind. And God provided for him because of his faithfulness. In fact, God made Boaz a very wealthy man in Bethlehem. Ruth, she happens upon Boaz's field. We read this in verses 2 through 3. It says, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And so Leviticus, it commanded that farmers in Israel should not completely harvest everything in their fields. They were always to leave something behind, and if they happened to drop some grain, they were commanded to just leave it there. They couldn't pick it up. And this was the natural way that the people of Israel were called to provide for the poor and the needy among them. You see, this taught the farmers generosity, and it also taught the poor that they're to be active in working with dignity to receive this kind of gift that's given to them. Because there's grain left behind, those who were in need could come and they could glean the remains for themselves. And this is exactly what's happening here. This is exactly what Ruth goes out to do. However, then we see something change. Boaz arrives and he notices Ruth. Verse 4, "And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, 'The Lord be with you.' And they answered, 'The Lord bless you.'" And so immediately we get the sense that Boaz, he's a man of authority, but also a man of real character. It seems that he is godly in the way that he relates to his servants, and he has a kind of relationship where they relate in the same way well back to him. Continuing on in verse 6, "Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, 'Whose woman is this?' And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, 'She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab.' She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers.' So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest." So Ruth, she may not have known it, but she was under inspection. The supervisor was looking at what kind of job that Ruth was doing, and he was impressed that she was doing a good job. He relays this back to Boaz, and the fact that she did a good job is important because it makes a good impression to Boaz. We need to understand that we are also under inspection in a very real and a very similar way. At times we do not know it, but we are constantly being watched by others, people who are looking to see how we are going to live our lives. And what they see will often make a very dramatic difference in our lives and theirs. In this case, what Boaz can see about Ruth's life makes all the difference in the world to how this story turns out. Verses 8 through 9. "Then Boaz said to Ruth, 'Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn.'" Boaz is instructing Ruth to stick with him, to stick with his workers, because he is going to personally take care of her. That's a big deal. Why this incredible and seemingly random act of kindness? Why this random act of kindness to someone like her, right? Someone who's a Moabite, a foreigner, someone who all the Jews would have considered has no place in their land. Ruth, she wonders this also. Verses 10 through 13. "Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, 'Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?' But Boaz answered her, 'All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how You left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Then she said, "I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants." And so, was this a random act of kindness? No. No. Ruth is not a story about luck. Let me repeat that. The book of Ruth, this story we're reading, it is not a story about luck. It is a story about providence. Nothing is an accident, and this story illustrates that. God is always active. He is always arranging things for His glory and our good. Though we cannot see it, He is always sovereignly, providentially working to this end. And therefore, it was not random that Ruth ended up in Boaz's field. The text, it says it funnily, it says that Ruth happened to come into Boaz's field. That's probably how it felt to her. But what looks like coincidence or luck from the ground levels, often providence from the God level. Ruth did not stumble into this right field by chance. She was quietly guided there by the hand of the Lord whenever she was learning to trust Him. This is how the invisible hand of God often works. Through very faithful steps, through ordinary decisions we make in faith. Her meeting Boaz was not just a lucky break, it was a divinely ordained meeting. It was arranged by God for very specific purposes, orchestrated from the very beginning. And this is what Boaz is recognizing here. It was no random meeting. This was no random kindness. Just as God has seen Ruth's heart, so has Boaz. Her faith in God, her devotion to Naomi has been noticed. She's been inspected, she's been observed, and now she's been noticed. And because God notices, He calls His servant Boaz to notice so that Boaz can bless Ruth. The love God gives people to share is often His chosen instrument of divine care. How different would your life be if you actively looked at yourself this way? That through you, God would meet the need. That through you, God's love would go out and it would touch the lives of those around you. You see, in this example, what we're seeing is that God is loving Ruth through the person of Boaz. And Boaz, he clearly sees himself this way. He doesn't see Ruth's need and says, "Well, hope it all works out, you widow. Heard you're poor. Heard you don't have anything. I'll pray for you." He doesn't do that. He does something concrete to bring God's peace into her world. A world which seems much like void at this point in her life. Through Boaz, God is taking care of Ruth. Jesus, He says it this way. He says, "Just as you have done for the least of these my brothers, so you have done it unto me." This is that same sort of idea. But we also see the reverse, that whenever we go out and we take care of the least of these, our brothers, the person who receives that is receiving it not only from us, but it's receiving it from our Lord. It works in both ways. Whenever we, as the image of God, bless others, it is God blessing others. And whenever we receive blessing, whenever we receive blessing from others, it is others loving the image of God within us. Boaz, he continues to recognize this and continues to bless Ruth. Verses 14 through 16. "And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, 'Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine.' So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So Boaz, he is not just blessing Ruth in some ordinary way. He is blessing Ruth in an extraordinary way. He's going out of his way to bless her to the highest degree. It would have been enough if he just invited her to the meal. Okay, it already would have been more than enough. But he also invited her to share fully in the meal. He serves her even the privileged dipping of the bread into the wine. It would have been enough to just allow Ruth to glean from his field. But he also instructed his men to allow her to take from what was already gathered from the grain harvests. That's going beyond what was required of him by the law. This is extraordinary, extra mile type of blessing. And seizing this blessing, Ruth finishes her workday. From sunup to sundown, this was a hard day. A hard day of work, and God, through Boaz, he rewards her for it. Verse 17, so she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. It's about 22 liters of barley. It's a pretty good haul for someone who had nothing, right? She brings everything home to Naomi, who has quite the reaction to hearing what God through Boaz has done for her. Verses 18 through 23. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "This man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "This man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest.'" And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted." So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. In these final verses, we are seeing things start to change as the rest of the story is getting set up. Things have already dramatically changed in this chapter from where we started. At the end of Ruth chapter 1, at the beginning of Ruth chapter 2, we see loss and uncertainty. It was hard at the end of Ruth chapter 1 to see any kind of hope of redemption. We looked at that last week. But this week, in Ruth chapter 2, it ends with provision, where we are beginning to see that kind of redemption unfold. Is everything fixed yet? No, okay? But we can begin to see that path. In fact, Naomi excitedly points out Boaz's identity as a redeemer. You know, it's funny. You compare this attitude of Naomi to what came before. Whereas in chapter 1, we, like Naomi, might have bitterly asked, what is God doing, right? Why is he dealing so harshly with me? Indeed, Naomi, just last chapter, she came into the town of Bethlehem crying out, "Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me." But now, this same woman is praising God for his kindness. Did you catch that? It was hard to see before. It was hard to see in the pain, in the suffering, in the anxiety of her circumstance. But now that she has seen more of God's redemptive plan beginning to unfold, she is able to better believe what we learn in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, that all things are working together for good and for those who love God. All things are working together for good for those who love God. All this came by God's very quiet, very ordinary providence in the mundane events of one ordinary day. One day. And this goes to show we need not wait until we see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel for us to actually have hope. We talked a lot last week about hope. This is what we must know. Stories like this instruct us in something critical, that we have the right, we have the reason to have hope at all times, even when we don't see that glimmer of light. Why? Because we have seen God's faithfulness already. We have seen His ultimate faithfulness in providing us His Son and in securing eternal redemption. We can do by His power what we can never do by our own strength. He is the comforter. He is the security. And by all this, we can trust God, knowing that He's got a plan for us. A plan that He is working together, a redemptive plan for our good. We just have to remember that He's watching us. Do you think about that? Do you realize that He is inspecting and He is observing our every move? He is looking at our lives to see how we express faith and devotion even whenever our lives are hard. Let me ask you, what is God observing about you with how you're living your life? Are you living with faith through your anxieties? Are you living as if God is able to give you a peace from them? Think on these questions. If there is one theme that unifies this chapter, it is this: God is providing shalom. Everyone say shalom. It's a fun word to say, so you might as well say it. On this week of Advent that we're reflecting on the idea of peace, I think let's remember that's what peace is, shalom. Shalom is a Hebrew word that means this idea of peace. But it's not kind of this inner calm sort of thing that we sometimes think about with peace. It's actually a peace which is grounded in the circumstance we're in. It is a sense of peace, a completeness, a wholeness, a welfare, a prosperity. You can see this kind of peace that God gives all over Ruth chapter 2. Look at the layers of peace that Boaz offers. Ruth, she moves from uncertainty to stability. You don't have to drift from field to field anymore, Ruth. You can stay here. From isolation, she's giving belonging. He says, stay here, stay with my people. You have a name here, you have a place here. You don't have to wander somewhere else. You have a people here. From vulnerability, she is given protection. Boaz says, I've commanded the men not to touch you. From scarcity, she's given abundance. She takes home more grain than she could have ever imagined whenever she first went out into these fields. Don't you see that Boaz is creating a zone of shalom around Ruth? But as we recognize, this is not just Boaz providing that kind of peace. It is God. Boaz names this whenever he blesses her by saying, you have taken refuge under the wings of the God of Israel. That's a great picture, right? It's a picture of like a bird covering its young. What's in that? It's warmth. It's some kind of covering, presence, nearness, safety, protection. This is what God is doing for Ruth. You see, Ruth, she came into Israel looking for food alongside Naomi. But Boaz recognizes the deeper reality. She came looking for refuge in God himself. There is no peace that one can have apart from the source of peace, which is God. And that lesson, it has a very relevant application for us in this Advent season. Because the peace that Ruth finds in Boaz points forward to the Prince of Peace, Jesus, who provides for all of our needs. You see, Boaz, he is a picture of Jesus, as we will see very soon in the following chapters of the book of Ruth. Boaz is a worthy man from Bethlehem like Jesus. He is a redeemer like Jesus. He is a man like Jesus who uses his strength to protect, to provide, and to welcome the outsider. Ruth is a picture of us, poor in spirit, no claim on grace, coming into the Redeemer's field with nothing to offer but our need. And in Christ, God says to us what Boaz says to Ruth, come stay in my field. I've commanded the enemy not to touch you. Come to my table. Eat until you're filled. You are under my wings now. So this morning, let me ask you, where is it that you feel unsafe, unsteady, anxious this Advent? Maybe it's financial. You're wondering how you can afford what's coming. Maybe it's medical. Maybe either for you or for those you love, there are things going on physically that you're really worried about. Maybe it's relational. Perhaps you're dealing with some kind of rejection or conflict, estrangement with those you love. Or perhaps it's just some level of a personal problem that only you understand. A personal kind of depression, some fear going on in your life, maybe intrusive thoughts. Ruth chapter 2, it invites you to do what Ruth did, to have faith and to come into the field of the Redeemer. See, you may not be able to see the whole plan. Okay, in the same way Ruth was not able to see the whole plan. You may feel like you're just trying to do what you can to make it through the day. And while doing that, you may be killing yourself working. But as you take small steps of obedience, as you're seeking Him, as you're gathering with His people, as you're listening to His word, this is the promise that God sees you. He notices your faith, and He is already providentially at work to bring to you the peace that you need. Though Ruth is just an outsider, she is invited to Ruth's table, where she is able to be filled, where He personally serves her. And for us as Christians, this concept actually should feel very familiar. For just before He went to the cross, Jesus likewise gathered around a table with His disciples. They ate bread and drank wine together. And Jesus commanded them that when they do this, they must remember that when they eat and when they drink, their lives are dependent upon Him. Not only in the shallow physical ways that we all depend on, but in the deeper spiritual realities. For with Christ at this Last Supper, His bread symbolized His body that would be broken for us. The wine symbolized His blood that would be shed for us. And by doing these things, we can have eternal peace through Him. Therefore, this ordinance of the Lord's Supper, of communion, of Eucharist, is this idea that we have that same kind of shalom, that same kind of peace with our Redeemer. This is what we remember every time we gather to do this. And so, as I ask the elders to come forward, let me call you. If you have embraced Jesus as your Redeemer, if you trust Him as your peace, come to the table. I do want to say that if you are not yet trusting in Jesus as your Redeemer, go ahead and just let these elements pass by from you. The reason I say that is not to single you out, but it's to honor what this meal means. What the Lord's Supper is a celebration for those who have taken refuge under the wings of God. And so if that is not you, if today you do not know Jesus, but yet you seek after that, you desire that, you desire the peace that Jesus offers, your next step is not to practice this physical bread and wine that we drink now. It is to accept the substance of the bread and the wine. It is to embrace the person of Jesus who can cleanse you from all sin, who can offer you all peace of all anxiety. He invites you there. He invites you to come to Him. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He says, "Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst." And so as we enter into this time, let us receive and let us remember that promise and that call of